Hello everyone. If your day has been loud, let this be the quiet after the storm. Set down what you carried here. Breathe in, slowly, and let it go. Tonight, we won't chase heroes or empires. We'll listen instead for the softer echoes that history leaves behind. A breath through an old corridor, a spark from the torch of memory. This story begins not with battle, but with a dream, a whisper in the dark. A woman once saw a serpent coil around her husband's sleeping face and took it for a sign that destiny had chosen him. In time, his name would move through the dust of the arena, rise against the weight of Rome, and fall again. Yet still, somehow, keep breathing through centuries. Close your eyes. Let the noise fade to distance. Where are you listening from tonight? A quiet room, a city window, a little town beneath the rain. Tell me in the comments. And if stories like this help you rest, you can subscribe and return whenever the night feels heavy. Now, the lamp grows steady, the room grows still. Let us drift backward, softly, to a time when freedom was only a word, and one man dared to dream it aloud. Night in Thrace came like a breath drawn by the earth itself, slow, deep, and heavy with mist. The moon hung low, its pale light resting over hills that looked almost alive in the darkness. In one small house at the edge of a valley, a woman stirred from sleep. She had heard a sound, soft as silk, sliding against skin. When her eyes adjusted to the dimness, she saw it a serpent, winding its way across the blankets. It moved toward the man sleeping beside her. Its scales shimmered faintly, each one catching the faint gleam of the oil lamp. The creature coiled once around his neck, once around his brow, and then paused, its tongue flickering in the air, as if tasting a secret. The woman did not cry out. In Thrace, omens were everywhere. The flight of a raven, the pattern of smoke, the dream before dawn, all were messages, if one knew how to listen. So she watched in stillness. The serpent lingered for a moment, then slipped away into the shadows, leaving behind nothing but a faint trail of warmth. The woman's breath trembled in her throat. To her, the sight was not horror, it was prophecy. When her husband awoke, she told him what she had seen. Her voice was quiet, like someone describing a memory rather than a miracle. A serpent crowned your head, she said. It wrapped around you as if claiming you. Perhaps the gods have chosen you for something vast, something fearful and powerful all at once. He listened, not answering. Outside, the first grey light of morning crept across the hills. Smoke rose from the hearths of neighboring huts. The world continued as always, yet something invisible had changed. That man was Spartacus. The name would later carry the weight of rebellion, of broken chains and legions brought low. But before it echoed through Rome's marble halls, it was just a quiet name in a quiet valley, belonging to a man who had not yet learned what destiny would ask of him. He was Thracian, born of a rugged land between mountains and sea, where winters were long and the soil was red with iron. The Thracians were said to be fierce, but they were also poets, hunters, dreamers. They sang to the wind and spoke to rivers. The Greeks called them barbarians, but that was only because they sang in a tongue the Greeks did not understand. Plutarch, writing long after Spartacus's death, said he was of nomadic stock, wise and noble in spirit, more Hellenic than Thracian. Perhaps that meant he was thoughtful, deliberate, less given to impulse, more to reflection. One imagines him as a man who listened before he spoke, who saw more than he said. Maybe, as a young man, he had stood on a hillside watching the Roman banners flicker on the horizon. The empire was moving, stretching its reach toward his homeland. Rome did not conquer with fire alone. It conquered with promises of order, of pay, of survival. Many Thracians joined its legions, trading the wild freedom of their hills for the discipline of Roman command. Spartacus, too, once carried a Roman spear. It is strange to imagine him then, not yet a symbol, not yet a rebel, but a soldier in Rome's uniform. Perhaps he fought in distant campaigns, learning the rhythm of Roman war, the steady step, the measured strike, the silence after victory. Yet inside him, something must have remained untouched, some small piece that refused to bow completely. The records blur after that. Some say he deserted, weary of a war that was not his. Others claim he led raids against Roman patrols, striking from the forests like the old Thracian warriors before him. Whatever the truth, it ended the same way. He was captured, stripped of rank, of freedom, of everything that had once been his. They sold him into slavery. And so, quietly, the story that would shake Rome began with the sound of chains closing. Imagine him then, in the hold of a slave cart. The road to Capua stretched before him, lined with olive trees and dust. The air was thick with heat. Around him, other captives sat in silence, their faces expressionless, as though their souls had already been taken somewhere else. Perhaps he looked out toward the hills, remembering the serpent's coil and his wife's calm voice. He might have wondered if prophecy always felt like this, not a grand revelation, but a slow tightening, like a hand closing gently around one's fate. For now, he was only a man among thousands. Rome had no shortage of slaves, no shortage of bodies to fill its mines, its farms, its arenas. His strength was the only thing that set him apart, and even that belonged to someone else now. In time, he would be sold to a man named Lentulus Batiatus, the owner of a gladiator school in Capua. But that part of the tale waits ahead. For now, he sat in the dim half-light, feeling the weight of iron on his wrists, the slow turning of a wheel that would not stop. Outside, the wind carried the scent of cypress and dust. The empire moved on, unaware that within its machinery, one small life had begun to twist against its gears. Somewhere in the dark, perhaps in the same dream that had shown the serpent, a voice might have whispered softly, so softly that power and tragedy are often born together. And so the omen lingered, not as fear, but as a promise. The serpent had wrapped around his head not to harm, but to remind. Everything that coils must one day strike. Everything that rises from silence must return to it. And for now, the world slept on. In the far reaches of the ancient world, where the mountains met the sea and the winds never slept, there was a land called Thrace. It was not the polished marble of Greece, nor the ordered roads of Rome, but something older, a rough, breathing wilderness where men spoke in songs and carried both kindness and fury in the same heart. The air smelled of pine and iron. Herds grazed on steep slopes. Rivers ran cold and fast, carving their way toward the dark waters of the Black Sea. For centuries, Thrace had stood at the border between worlds, not quite east, not quite west, not fully wild, not fully tamed. Traders passed through with their carts, soldiers with their banners, travelers with stories from lands most had never seen. In winter, when snow buried the mountain paths, people stayed close to their fires and told tales of gods and spirits who roamed the ridges at night. The old women said the wind itself carried memories, that if you listened long enough, you could hear voices of the dead riding on the storm. It was in this land, shaped by silence and wind, that Spartacus was born. No one recorded the exact year or the name of his village. History keeps such details only for emperors. But somewhere, in the hills near the river Strymon, a boy learned to watch the sky, to tell time by the flight of crows, and to read meaning in the way the clouds broke against the peaks. Life was not easy there. The soil was stubborn, the winters unkind. But hardship, like the cold, was simply part of life, a companion, not an enemy. The Thracians were herders, farmers, hunters, and warriors when they needed to be. To survive was to move with the land, not against it. And so, when Rome's armies began to press farther north, the people of Thrace watched with wary eyes. The Romans came not as raiders, but as administrators, speaking of alliances, taxes, and order. They built roads across the valleys, cut through forests to raise forts of stone. To some, they brought trade and silver. To others, only silence and obedience. Spartacus was young then, strong enough to fight, thoughtful enough to notice how quickly things were changing. It is said he joined Rome's auxiliary forces, as many Thracians did. The empire had a way of turning enemies into allies, and allies into tools. For a price, or for the promise of food and freedom, young men were given shields, taught Latin commands, and marched beneath the same eagles that had once frightened them. Perhaps Spartacus went willingly, believing that serving Rome might protect his village. Or perhaps he was taken by conscription, handed a spear, and told where to stand. History is silent on that point. It tells us only that he fought well, that he learned the ways of the legion, the steady pace of the march, the discipline of silence, the weight of armor pressing down like fate. He would have seen lands beyond his own sunburnt fields of Macedonia, the narrow passes of Epirus, perhaps even the coastal plains of Asia Minor. The empire stretched endlessly then, a map of conquest drawn in dust and blood. For a Thracian boy, to serve Rome was to look upon the vastness of the world and realize how small one life could be. Yet something must have begun to stir in him, a quiet question, a slow unease. The Romans were skilled in war, yes, but also in control. Every victory was followed by chains. Every alliance ended in obedience. To fight for them was to strengthen the hand that held the whip. At some moment, no one knows when Spartacus turned away. Some say he deserted, others that he led a band of raiders, striking at Roman supply lines, stealing back what had been taken. The sources disagree, and perhaps they always will. But between those lines of uncertainty lies the truth of a human heart, that a man can serve only so long before the silence inside him begins to speak. Rome caught him, of course. It always did. The empire was patient, precise, and very good at remembering. When they took him, they did not kill him. Not yet. They chose something slower, something that erased not only freedom, but the illusion of identity. They sold him. Imagine the market square where the transaction took place. The smell of sweat and coin, the auctioneer's voice rising over the crowd, a chain drawn taut around his neck, buyers studying muscles like they were weighing horses, the sun glinting off bronze coins that changed hands too easily. In that moment, the borders of Thrace must have seemed far away, the wind and songs of his homeland replaced by the cold ring of iron. Yet even as the shackles closed, the land he came from did not vanish. It lived in him still, quiet but unbroken, like the wind that never stopped blowing across those distant hills. Empires have many ways of turning lives. Some they lift, some they erase. Most, they simply bend until they fit the shape of usefulness. Spartacus's life was bent now, curved toward a fate he did not yet see. And yet, within that curve was something Rome could not touch, a stillness that waited, like the pause before a storm. It would take years, chains, and blood before it spoke aloud, but the whisper had already begun. The boy of Thrace was gone, but the man who would challenge an empire was already awake beneath the quiet of his own defeat. Capua was a place of heat and dust. The air shimmered even at dawn, heavy with the smell of iron and oil. Somewhere beyond the walls, the noise of the city drifted in carts creaking, sellers calling, dogs barking. But inside the stone enclosure of the ludus, There was only the rhythm of bodies, breath, strike, step, and silence. This was where Spartacus's world narrowed to movement. Here, in Lentulus Batiatus's gladiator school, men were reshaped, stripped of name and choice, until only instinct remained. The walls were high and white, catching the sun. The ground was packed dirt, dark with sweat. Every sound echoed: the scrape of metal, the clash of practice blades, the grunt of impact. They called the fighters familia gladiatoria, a strange word, family, for men bought and kept to die. Each belonged to a trainer. Each had a cell, a schedule, and a future measured in bouts. Some had been slaves from birth. Others, like Spartacus, had known freedom once, and now tasted its absence more sharply. At dawn, they woke to the crack of the overseer's staff. Bread, water, drills. The first hours were for conditioning sandbags lifted and dropped. Wooden swords swung until the arms burned. By midday, the courtyard shimmered with heat. The men stood bare, chested beneath the sun, their skin streaked with dust. The murmillo, the role Spartacus was chosen for, was the heavy type of fighter, named for the fish-shaped crest on his helmet. He carried the scutum, a broad curved shield almost as tall as his torso, and the gladius, the short Roman sword meant for thrusting. His right arm was wrapped in a guard of bronze, his left leg protected by a greave. The rest of his body was bare, open to the crowd, to the cuts that proved courage. The murmillo's armor gleamed when polished, but inside it, the air was suffocating. The helmet's narrow slit let in little light. When the visor closed, the world became a circle of darkness edged by noise. The weight of it pressed against the skull like thought itself, constant, unyielding. Each day, Spartacus learned again what endurance meant. He learned how to fall without breaking, how to breathe through pain, how to strike not from anger but from timing. Rage was wasteful here. Control was everything. To fight too fast was to die sooner. To fight too slowly was to be mocked. The art was not to win, but to last. Sometimes, in the evenings, after training ended, the men would sit in the shade and clean their weapons. They spoke little. Some sharpened blades until sparks danced in the fading light. Others traced their scars with quiet fascination, remembering which ones had been gifts from which teacher. The skin became a map of survival, each mark a date, a lesson, a reminder that they were still here. A few had tattoos from home, dark lines curling along arms and shoulders, remnants of tribes long conquered. Under the grime, the ink still shone faintly. When the guards weren't watching, they compared them, laughed softly, or recited the old words that went with them. For a heartbeat, they were men again, not instruments of spectacle. Batiatus himself rarely entered the yard. He preferred the upper walkways, where he could watch without smelling the sweat. To him, each fighter was an investment. A healthy gladiator was silver in the pocket. A dead one, only an expense. Yet he knew that death was part of the business, and so, every few months, he sent some of them to the arena in Capua to keep the crowd hungry for more. Capua's amphitheater was smaller than Rome's, but crueler in its intimacy. The sand was pale and fine, the stands close enough that the audience could see the blood, hear the breathing. Some of the men returned from there with wounds that took months to heal. Others never returned at all. We do not linger on the fights. They were not the glory that poets imagined. They were endurance turned into theater, sweat, fear, and exhaustion made into entertainment. And yet, within that cycle of violence, Spartacus survived. He survived not because he loved the arena, but because he understood it. He learned the rhythm of crowds, the way a moment's stillness could draw 1,000 eyes, how mercy, when offered by gesture, could win more cheers than a kill. He learned that death, when delayed, became its own kind of power. Some nights, lying on the hard cot in his cell, he might have thought of Thrace, of the cold rivers, and the whisper of pines. The air in Capua was thicker, unmoving. When he closed his eyes, he could still hear the sea from memory, like a voice calling from far away. Perhaps he dreamed of the serpent again, the one his wife had seen. Perhaps he wondered if the prophecy had already come true, if the creature that once encircled him was not fate, but Rome itself. For now, he endured. The body learned what the spirit could not escape: repetition, restraint, survival. In the ludus, time was marked by muscle, by healing and reopening, by the slow hardening of hands. Pain lost its meaning. It became merely another routine. To live, he had to forget the world beyond the walls. To stay alive, he had to let the rhythm carry him. Breathe in, strike, step, wait, breathe out. And still, somewhere deep inside, beneath all the discipline and dust, a part of him refused to quiet. It did not plan, it did not speak, it simply watched. It was the same part that had once looked at Roman banners and wondered what freedom meant. In time, that silence would move. It would stretch, rise, and take shape. But here, in Capua, it only waited patient as stone, hidden behind the glint of a helmet and the slow pulse of a man who had learned to endure everything except forgetting who he was. There are nights when the air itself feels restless, as if history is about to breathe differently. Capua had such a night. The torches burned lower, and the corridors of the ludus fell into silence, the kind that feels thick, as though sound itself were holding its breath. In the kitchens, far from the eyes of the guards, a few men were awake. They were not whispering of escape, they were carving it. The tools were not swords, but knives, kitchen blades dulled by years of cutting bread and bone. In their hands, even a fragment of iron felt alive. 78 men, if Plutarch is to be believed, shared that fragile courage. They had no map, no allies, only the common rhythm of hunger and hope. The air smelled of smoke and old stew. Water dripped from the ceiling. Somewhere above, the watchmen laughed at a joke, half forgotten. Down here, the gladiators waited still, quiet, eyes fixed on the small wooden door that led toward the yard. Someone nodded, someone exhaled. The world changed. When they moved, it was without shouting. Their feet were bare, their hands sure. The first guard to fall had no time to call for help. The second dropped his torch, and its glow rolled across the floor like spilled fire. In that brief flare, the men saw one another clearly, faces streaked with sweat, with disbelief. Freedom was a soundless thing at first. The rush of blood, the crack of a lock, the sudden vastness of an open gate. Outside, the night was thick with cloud. Rain threatened but did not fall. The fugitives ran through narrow streets, past sleeping houses, and the scent of olive oil and ash. Behind them, the ludus was already stirring, dogs barking, orders shouted, metal scraping against stone. But ahead was space. They reached the outskirts just as dawn began to pale the eastern sky. Then, by what some would later call chance, and others fate, they stumbled upon a caravan of wagons. The wagons carried weapons, swords, shields, helmets bound for another city. A single moment, and the circle turned. What had been tools of their imprisonment became instruments of their survival. They armed themselves quickly, almost reverently. The weight of a true sword was different from a kitchen blade. It changed a man's posture, his breathing, his belief. For the first time, they were no longer unarmed men running. They were soldiers, however rough, and the morning air tasted different. Among them were two Gauls, Crixus and Oenomaus, strong, broad, fierce-eyed. They had fought beside Spartacus in the Ludus, and now they moved beside him again, not as rivals but as equals. Leadership, in such moments, is not declared. It is recognized quietly, as water recognizes its own reflection. Spartacus did not crown himself commander. He simply walked first, holding the sword like someone remembering how to breathe. The others followed, not because of orders, but because of something older than command trust. They moved south, toward Mount Vesuvius, whose dark outline waited against the horizon. The mountain was steep, volcanic, ringed with dense forest. To most, it was a place to avoid. To them, it was safety height, distance, a place to see danger coming. The road was long and rough. Some of the men limped from old wounds, others from chains that had only just been broken, but they did not complain. They shared what food they found, figs from abandoned stalls, bread still warm from a baker's shelf. When they passed small farms, they took what they needed, but harmed no one who did not raise a weapon against them. It was not mercy, exactly, but a code unspoken, born of those who had known too much cruelty to repeat it. As the days passed, others joined them. Escaped slaves, shepherds, fugitives from debt and punishment, men with nothing left to lose. The group grew in number, but not in noise. At night, they made fires low and covered, speaking little. The flicker of flame caught the glint of metal and the shine of eyes that no longer looked downward. When they reached the lower slopes of Vesuvius, the air grew cooler. The land fell away behind them, Capua's plain, spread like a faded memory. They built a camp of makeshift shelters, their few possessions piled neatly in the center. Each man took turns on watch. When food was found, it was divided evenly, without argument. Even the spoils from the wagons were shared: armor, coins, blades. The act was simple, but it bound them more tightly than any oath. Spartacus sat apart sometimes, sharpening his gladius with a piece of stone. Around him, the murmurs of his new companions rose and fell like the wind. He said little, only watching the clouds gather over the mountain's peak. Perhaps he thought of the omen again, the serpent around his head, and wondered if this, too, was part of its slow unfolding. What began as a handful of men with stolen knives had become the start of something Rome could not yet see. The empire was vast, disciplined, proud. It had crushed rebellions far greater than this. And yet, every empire forgets the same truth, that the will to be free is quiet, patient, and hard to kill. The fires burned low that night. Someone hummed a tune from home. Someone else whispered a prayer. Above them, Vesuvius loomed like a dark guardian, silent, waiting, and kind for now. In the morning, they would wake to the smell of rain on ash, to the first light catching on their blades. They would still be fugitives, yes, but also something more. For the first time, the word "we" meant something larger than survival, and from that fragile beginning, the story would grow, carried by breath and belief, like a small flame sheltered by many hands. The mountain watched them. By day, Mount Vesuvius rose dark and still, its slopes clothed in wild vines and ash-hardened soil. By night, it became a shape of shadows, silent, immense, and patient. The fugitives made their camp high on its side, sheltered by rocks and thick vegetation. From above, smoke from their fires blended with the mountain's breath. Below, on the open plain, the Roman militia gathered. It was not a legion, not the disciplined heart of Rome, but a hastily formed force under Gaius Claudius Glaber, a praetor sent to end what the Senate still called a minor disturbance. 3,000 men, perhaps more, armed but untested, confident that hunger would do their work for them. Glaber ordered his men to block the single road leading down from the mountain. He believed the fugitives were trapped, cornered like wild dogs, with nowhere to go but downward into his waiting line. His soldiers lit fires along the road, ate, laughed, sharpened their blades. They had not yet learned that desperation, when paired with patience, can outthink strategy. Above them, Spartacus and his companions watched the flicker of those fires. The light below seemed close enough to touch, yet impossibly far. They had food for only a few days left. The air at that height was sharp, the ground damp with the breath of the volcano. And yet, no one spoke of surrender. The men had not come this far to kneel again. It was Spartacus who first noticed the vines. They grew thick and tangled along the cliffs, strong, wiry, rooted deep into cracks of rock. To most, they were impassable, but to eyes that had known captivity, they looked like possibility. The plan was as simple as it was absurd: to climb down the unguarded side of the mountain, using those living ropes, and fall upon the Romans from behind. They began at night. No torches, no noise, only the rustle of leaves and the slow scrape of skin against bark. One by one, men descended into darkness. Their hands bled on the rough vines, their feet searched blindly for stone. The air smelled of wet earth and the faint tang of sulfur. Above them, the stars burned quietly, indifferent and watchful. It was not a charge. It was a slow exhale, a collective breath released after years of silence. Every movement was deliberate, every heartbeat counted. Those who slipped were caught by the next below. No one was left behind. In that descent, they were no longer fugitives but one living body, moving as if guided by the same pulse. At the foot of the cliffs, the ground leveled out into sparse grass and gravel. The camp of Glaber's militia lay ahead, the sound of laughter drifting lazily through the night. The Romans believed their prey was still above, waiting to starve. Their sentries leaned on spears, eyes half closed, lulled by the warmth of their own fires. Spartacus gave a signal, not a shout, just a gesture of the hand, almost gentle. They moved like water, silent at first, then all at once. The first blows landed before the guards could cry alarm. The firelight flared briefly, revealing faces not savage, not enraged, but calm, intent, unstoppable. The Romans stumbled in confusion, unable to form ranks. The fugitives fought not with the clumsiness of rebellion, but with the precision of those who had trained under the empire itself. Many of them had once served Rome, and now turned that same discipline against it. The clash lasted less than an hour. When it ended, the hillside was quiet again, save for the crackle of abandoned fires. When dawn broke, the camp was theirs. Weapons, armor, supplies, all the things that had once been used to cage them now lay in their hands. They did not cheer. They did not boast. Instead, they stood for a long moment, catching their breath, letting the weight of what had happened settle. Victory, in that stillness, felt less like triumph and more like awakening. They had not defeated an empire, only a small, careless piece of it, but the balance had shifted. Rome had underestimated them, and that forgetfulness was its first wound. As the sun rose, the mountain's shadow stretched over the plain. The vines that had carried them to freedom still hung from the cliffs, swaying gently in the wind. To the men, they looked almost sacred, not as tools, but as witnesses. They had given a path when none existed. Spartacus walked among the fallen, collecting weapons, checking on his men. When he reached the base of the cliff, he paused and looked upward. The vines moved softly, whispering against stone. He placed his hand on one of them, as though in thanks. By midday, they had armed themselves fully. Roman swords, Roman shields, Roman discipline all now belonged to those Rome had sought to erase. The campfire smoke rose thinly into the sky, signaling nothing, and yet it meant everything. In Capua, the Senate would soon hear of the defeat and laugh no longer. But on that morning, there was no thought of politics, only the hush of relief. The men sat together on the ground, sharing bread and water, their laughter small but real. For the first time, they felt not hunted, but human. The mountain loomed above, vast and unmoved, its slope still marked with the scars of their climb. Yet to those who had descended it, the world now seemed larger, filled not with walls, but with doors. Sometimes, freedom begins not with a battle cry, but with the quiet patience of those who refuse to die in the place they were put. Sometimes, it begins with a vine, reaching down through the dark, waiting for a hand to trust it. The wind changed over the plains of Campania. It no longer carried the smell of fear, but of movement quiet, steady, and certain. The men who had once fled barefoot from Capua were now an army, though they did not call themselves one. They carried mismatched shields, repaired helmets, and the dust of the road in their hair. What they shared was not discipline, but rhythm, the slow confidence of those who had already survived the impossible once. Rome did not yet understand this rhythm. To the Senate, the uprising was still a nuisance, an echo of chaos that could be silenced with one more praetor and one more force. The name they sent this time was Publius Varinius, or, in some tellings, Valerius. His orders were simple: find the fugitives, crush them, and return discipline to the Republic. He did not march alone. His lieutenants, Furius and Cassinius, led smaller detachments ahead of him, confident that their numbers would be enough. Each carried the pride of Rome like armor bright, heavy, and loud. They did not imagine that the men they hunted could plan, could wait, could strike with precision. But Spartacus was learning quickly. He moved his people not as a mob, but as a tide, silent one day, unstoppable the next. The old habits of the legion still lived in his bones, flanking, dividing, retreating only to return. Around him, Crixus and the Gauls handled the fiercer edge of the fight, Eunomaus the quieter side. Together, they had begun to turn survival into strategy. The first to fall was Furius. He had advanced too quickly, bringing 2,000 men into narrow ground between hills and forest. The rebels struck at dawn, when the mist lay low, and the birds had not yet started their songs. The Romans fought well, but their formation broke. There was no space to maneuver, no command loud enough to reach every man. By mid-morning, it was over. The hillside was silent again, save for the ravens. Spartacus did not linger on the field. He gathered what weapons could be salvaged, tended to the wounded, and moved on. The victory was quiet, almost reluctant. To celebrate felt dangerous, as if joy might summon Rome's attention more quickly. Soon after came Cassinius. He had been sent to reinforce Varinius, but he carried the same impatience that had doomed the first. His camp lay near a riverbank, comfortable, unguarded, confident in distance. The rebels found it at dusk. Cassinius, it is said, was bathing when the alarm rose. The water around him turned to ripples of panic as his soldiers scrambled for arms. By the time he mounted his horse, the camp was already in chaos. The attack was swift, not cruel. Fires rose, then vanished, as quickly as they had been lit. When the dust settled, the Romans were gone, their supplies taken, their pride scattered into the evening air. Word spread not loudly, but consistently, like the growth of a rumor that refuses to die. In villages, farmers whispered of the gladiators who had defeated Rome's soldiers. Some called them heroes, others omens. But for those still enslaved, the name Spartacus began to move like wind through locked doors. When at last Varinius himself came with his main force, the rebels were ready. By now their number had swelled not into an army Rome would recognize, but into something fluid and dangerous. They moved through woods and hills, striking where least expected. The Romans chased ghosts, always arriving a day too late. One morning, As mist lifted over the fields, Spartacus rode out to meet Varinius's vanguard. He was not armored in gold or draped in banners. His cloak was rough, his horse plain, but the air around him carried a stillness that made even soldiers hesitate. The fight that followed was uneven Rome, disciplined but uncertain. The rebels, fewer but alive in every motion. By dusk, Varinius's troops had broken ranks. The fugitives pressed forward, their momentum quiet but unstoppable. When the praetor's own horse was taken, Spartacus claimed it not as a trophy, but as a sign. He did not boast. He simply stroked the animal's neck, as though calming it, and turned away. To those who watched, that gesture meant more than any speech. In his hand, the horse became a symbol of reversal, Rome's order carried now by the man it had enslaved. There was no triumphal cry, no promise of conquest, only inevitability, slow as the turning of the seasons. The men rested that night beside a stream. They ate what they had, bread, olives, a little wine, and sat in the glow of small fires. No one spoke of victory. They had learned that to survive was miracle enough. Somewhere nearby, a Roman banner lay half buried in mud, its crimson dulled by earth and rain. The stars above were clear, cold, and distant. Spartacus looked up at them, his thoughts unreadable. Perhaps he saw in their stillness the pattern of what was coming, not glory, but endurance, the kind of history written not in marble, but in footsteps and smoke. Around him, the camp grew quiet. The sound of breathing replaced the sound of battle. The night wind moved gently through the grass, and the captured horse lifted its head, listening. Far away, Rome still believed the matter small, but on that quiet field, something irreversible had begun. The plains were open now, wide as breath. Spring had come quietly to Italy, softening the fields that war had trampled. For the men who followed Spartacus, the days no longer blurred into flight. They moved like a river slow, swollen with strength, gathering more with every mile. From the hills of Lucania to the pastures near Nola, new hands joined them, shepherds, deserters, slaves escaped from villas and quarries. Appian would later say they numbered in the tens of thousands, perhaps 70,000, perhaps more, but no one counted. They were not an army born of discipline, but of refusal, a congregation of the unforgotten, carrying hunger in one hand and possibility in the other. Their camp stretched across the lowlands like a city made of wood and smoke. Fires burned in circles. Pots simmered. Children for some had brought families played with carved sticks and stones. The sound of hammering mixed with laughter. Out of captivity, something like community had begun to form. Yet within that calm, a question slowly surfaced, one that could not be ignored forever. Now that they had defeated Rome's praetors, now that they had food, weapons, and ground under their feet, where were they going? Some said north. Across the Alps lay freedom, the lands of the Gauls and Thracians, far beyond Rome's reach. To cross would mean safety, anonymity, perhaps even peace. The idea glowed like dawn in the minds of those who had fought too long. The mountain passes would be cold, but the air beyond them would be clean, unclaimed. Others disagreed. They had seen Rome's wealth up close, its farms, its granaries, its estates filled with marble and chained labor. To turn away now, they argued, was to waste the power that had cost so much suffering to win. For the first time, the mighty republic trembled. Why not strike harder, take what was owed, make Rome feel what it had long inflicted? The debate did not tear the camp apart, but it divided the silence. At night, as the fires burned low, small groups gathered to talk in murmurs, not of anger, but of choice. Freedom meant different things to different men. For some, it was distance. For others, it was redress. Spartacus listened more than he spoke. He was a man who had learned that victory carried its own dangers, the illusion that one can steer the future by force alone. When asked which road they should take, he looked toward the north, toward the faint outline of mountains in the haze. "If we can pass them," he said softly, "we may live." But the air around him was restless. Rome was not just a place, it was a shadow cast across all of Italy. To leave it behind was to accept that its power would go on unchanged. Crixus and the Gauls saw it differently. Their blood still sang for retribution. They had fought too hard to walk away without making the empire bleed. In time, they broke off from the main group, not out of hatred, but conviction. They would raid further south, gathering supplies, testing strength. Spartacus did not stop them. Perhaps he knew that no leader could command freedom into unity. The rebellion was not a machine. It was a multitude of hearts, each remembering a different wound. And so the army divided one path toward the mountains, one remaining amid the plains. For a few days, the sky above them was wide and merciful. The wind moved gently through the tall grass, bending it in ripples like a sea. From a distance, their camps were only dots of fire under that vast expanse, as if two constellations had drifted apart. The old historians could never agree on what truly happened next. Plutarch would write that Spartacus meant to cross the Alps and disband his men, letting each return to his homeland. Others said he hesitated, tempted by Rome's vulnerability. Some claimed his followers refused to go, drunk on their victories. The truth, as always, lives between those lines, somewhere in the fog between longing and pride. What we know is this: for a brief moment, the rebellion stood at a crossroads, under a calm and open sky. The same hands that once clutched chains now held weapons polished by the morning light. The same men who once marched under command now chose their own direction. In that stillness, there was no shouting, no prophecy, only breath. The sound of wind passing over fields that had seen too much war. The smell of bread baking, the laughter of a child, the scrape of a whetstone, small, ordinary things that felt miraculous. Somewhere, perhaps, Spartacus stood alone at the edge of camp, watching the horizon blur into mist. He might have imagined both paths, the one that led upward into freedom and the one that spiraled back into fire. Each shone faintly in the early light, neither promising rest. Behind him, his people stirred. Ahead, the mountains waited. He breathed once, deeply, as if to steady the weight of so many lives. History would remember what followed as battles and numbers. But this quiet moment between, was its heart. The stillness before movement, the pause before choosing. The kind of silence that makes time itself seem to hold its breath. The morning wind moved again, bending the grass. The crossroads remained, and under that wide sky, thousands waited not for orders, but for meaning. It began with dust on the horizon, not the kind that comes from travel, but the kind that stays thick, unmoving, like a veil drawn over the earth. Beneath it, two armies approached each other slowly, drawn by inevitability more than intent. The place was near Mount Garganus, where the forests gave way to rocky fields, and the wind never quite stopped. There, Crixus and his followers waited. Separated now from Spartacus, they had wandered south, gathering supplies and spirit. Theirs was the fiercer band, the Gauls, the Germans, the men who carried vengeance like fire in their chests. Yet even fire burns down to embers, and when the Roman consul Gellius arrived, it was not fury that met him, but exhaustion wrapped in courage. The Romans came in, order their ranks tight, their shields aligned, their faces calm beneath their helmets. They moved as one body, trained and practiced, each gesture perfected by generations of discipline. Across the field, Crixus's men stood unevenly, some barefoot, some armored with scavenged iron, all waiting beneath a grey, uncertain sky. When the first signal sounded, the distance between them closed like a held breath released. There was no roar, no great clash that shook the ground, only the dull rhythm of impact, the muted sound of men meeting fate. Spears broke, shields splintered, the air filled with the low chorus of struggle. Crixus fought in the center, tall, broad, moving with the raw strength that had once filled arenas. He was not fighting for victory, but for meaning to show that freedom, even in defeat, could still stand tall. His blows landed heavy, his voice carried through the din, urging his men not toward rage, but toward remembrance. But numbers have their own silence. The Roman lines pressed forward with slow inevitability. Where one fell, another stepped in. Their formation folded and reformed like a tide against stone. By afternoon, the hill was lost. The sound of iron faded into wind. When it ended, the field was quiet again, a silence so deep it seemed to echo. The Romans, methodical as always, gathered their dead, counted the living, and made their reports. Gellius himself is said to have bowed his head slightly, not in mockery, but in acknowledgement. He had faced warriors who did not run. Among the fallen lay Crixus. His body, like so many others, was marked by dust and blood, indistinguishable at a glance. Yet those who knew him found him easily the great scar along his arm, the bronze ring still tied around his neck. They lifted him carefully, not as a leader now, but as a brother. When word reached Spartacus, he did not speak for a long time. The message was brought at dusk, when the fires in his camp were beginning to fade. He read it once, then lowered his head. Around him, men waited, some murmuring prayers, others silent, each remembering the man who had once stood beside them. The following day, the camp held no drills. No one trained, no orders were given. They built a pyre instead, not for Crixus's body, which they could not recover, but for his spirit. Wood was stacked high, fragrant with pine resin. Flowers, rare things in a rebel camp, were placed at its base. Spartacus stood before it, holding a torch. His face was unreadable in the flickering light. When he spoke, it was softly, so that those nearest leaned closer to hear. He was a man who remembered, he said. He did not forget what was taken, and he did not forget to live as though it could be reclaimed. Then he touched the torch to the wood. Flames rose, slow at first, then quick, catching the night wind. They painted the faces of the men in shades of gold and sorrow. No cheers, no cries, only the hush of thousands watching something larger than loss. Appian would later write that Spartacus sacrificed 300 Roman prisoners in Crixus's honor. Perhaps he did, perhaps he didn't. History writes loudly of vengeance, but softly of grief. What matters is that in that moment, something passed between the living and the dead, a promise, quiet but unbroken. When the flames dimmed, the night deepened. The men returned to their places, lay down on the earth, and looked up at the sky. Above them, the stars burned with a steadiness that felt almost merciful. The wind carried the scent of smoke across the hills, smoke that rose, wandered, and was gone. Rome would remember the victory. The rebels would remember the silence after it. And between those two memories, the truth would linger that even in defeat, a free man falls differently. History, like fabric, frays at the edges. The farther one travels from the moment itself, the looser the threads become stories crossing, sources disagreeing, memory turning from map to mist. The tale of Spartacus in the months after Crixus's fall is such a tangle. Victories remembered differently, defeats erased or doubled, names drifting between one parchment and the next. We try as gently as we can to trace the pattern without claiming to know the weave. After Garganus, the rebellion did not fade. It grew again, Quietly at first, the survivors of Crixus's band, finding Spartacus and joining his ranks. Their grief did not weaken them. It steadied them. When they marched once more, the air itself seemed slower, heavier, as if even the land understood that something solemn moved across it. 2 consuls, Lentulus and Gellius, were sent by the Senate to finish what the praetors could not. Each commanded a Roman legion, disciplined and proud, carrying the full weight of the Republic's dignity. By now, Rome no longer mocked this uprising. What had begun as a minor revolt was being spoken of as a war. The first clash came somewhere along the roads towards Cisalpine Gaul, that high northern land between mountains and rivers. Spartacus, according to Plutarch, meant to cross the Alps and dissolve his army there, granting his people freedom among the tribes beyond Rome's reach. It was a plan both daring and merciful, to end a rebellion not in blood, but in return. But the path north was not unguarded. Lentulus's legions blocked the way, and Gellius marched behind to trap them between. Here, the records begin to diverge. Appian writes that Spartacus turned and struck first, that he met Lentulus head-on and broke him, routing his men before swinging back to defeat Gellius as well. Plutarch, more cautious, omits Gellius entirely and speaks instead of another adversary, Gaius Cassius Longinus, governor of Cisalpine Gaul, who came south with 10,000 men and was himself overcome. Which version is true? Perhaps both in fragments, perhaps neither in full. The truth may lie scattered among the ashes of old camps and unmarked graves. What we know is that, for a time, the Roman eagles retreated, and the roads of northern Italy echoed not with triumphal march, but with the tread of fugitives who would not yield. Those who followed Spartacus began to believe that nothing could stop them. Each victory felt less like fortune and more like destiny, a steady unrolling of events that even Rome could not reverse. And yet, Spartacus himself seemed restless in success. Some say he stood on the plains near Mutina, looking north toward the Alps, the peaks pale and distant. Freedom lay beyond them, but so did uncertainty, scattered lives, cold exile, the slow forgetting of what had been shared. Behind him, the camp burned with the sounds of men who wanted to press on, to raid, to conquer. Ahead of him lay the quiet promise of disappearance. We do not know how long he hesitated, only that he turned back. Appian says he marched south again, toward the coast near Thurii. There, he made a new kind of camp, not for retreat, but for renewal. He gathered iron and bronze from the nearby mines, melting and shaping them into weapons. The clang of hammers replaced the noise of war. Fires burned through the nights, their glow reflecting off rough forged blades. In that place, the rebellion changed tone. It became less of a flight and more of a preparation, a pause between movements. Men trained, women mended clothing, new banners were sewn from whatever fabric could be found. Among them walked Spartacus, quieter than before, his gaze not fixed on Rome but on the work of their own hands. He had learned that to fight an empire was not only to meet it in battle, but to survive long enough to remember why one fought at all. The legions could destroy bodies. They could not command meaning. That had to be forged, like the weapons, through persistence and fire. The chroniclers, with their tidy lists and careful chronology, could never capture this in full. They wrote of victories, defeats, routes, and ranks, but not of the long, silent evenings by the forges, or the way the rebels began to speak less of vengeance and more of endurance. The mountain air carried the scent of molten metal. Sparks rose and drifted into the dark. In those sparks, perhaps, was the truer history not of armies clashing, but of people refusing to vanish. By now, the year was 72 BCE. Rome had recalled its laughter and replaced it with unease. Each dispatch from the field arrived slower, more carefully worded. No one wanted to be the next name attached to failure. And far to the south, the man they sought, the slave who had defied them, stood before his growing army with no illusions left. He did not think himself chosen by gods, nor destined for a throne. He had only learned to trust the rhythm of necessity, to rise when struck down, to move when cornered, to wait when pressed. The historians will never agree on what happened next, who advanced, who withdrew, whose orders came too late. But the quiet truth that threads through every account is this: Spartacus, once again, did not fall. And somewhere near Thurii, beneath the sound of hammers, the idea of Rome's invincibility began, gently, to bend. By the time winter began to pale, Rome had grown tired of humiliation. Each report from the field arrived like a bruise upon the Senate's pride. Praetors defeated, consuls disgraced, banners lost. The Republic had sent its officers, its cohorts, its confidants, and each had returned in fragments. The murmurs within the Curia turned colder. What Rome required now was not courage, but control. So they chose Marcus Licinius Crassus. His name was already heavy with rumor. Some called him the richest man in Rome, others the hungriest. Wealth had made him visible, but ambition had made him dangerous. He had built his fortune on ashes, buying burned houses, ruined estates, and rebuilding them for profit. He owned mines, slaves, and schools that trained them. Gold, for Crassus, was not ornament, but argument. It proved that order could be bought, that everything, loyalty, victory, even survival, had a price. He accepted the Senate's commission with the calm of a man who had been waiting for it all along. To him, the war against Spartacus was not only a threat to Rome, it was an opportunity to cleanse failure with precision, to rise where others had fallen. 6 new legions were raised. They did not march with the reckless zeal of past commanders. Crassus drilled them, stripped them, rebuilt them. He was not loved, but he was obeyed. His orders carried the tone of iron, concise, heavy, absolute. When he spoke of discipline, he did not mean punishment for others. He meant the quiet violence one inflicts upon the self to remain unmoved. Among his subordinates was a legate named Mummius, young, impatient, and eager to impress. Crassus sent him forward with 2 legions to scout the enemy, but gave one command above all: do not engage. Wait, observe, hold your ground. Mummius disobeyed. He found Spartacus's forces sooner than expected, and mistook their quiet for weakness. At dawn, he ordered an attack swift, confident, uncoordinated. The rebels met him with precision. Within hours, the legions broke. Many fled, some threw down their shields, and the few who stood their ground were swallowed by the tide. When news reached Crassus, he said little. He simply gathered his remaining legions and marched to the scene himself. The defeated soldiers knelt as he approached, dust on their faces, shame in their eyes. The general's silence weighed more than any outburst could have. Then, he revived a ritual Rome had nearly forgotten, one older than mercy, older even than glory. Decimation. It was a word from another century, almost mythic. When a unit failed in duty, it was divided into groups of 10. Lots were drawn. 1 in each 10 was chosen to die not by the enemy's sword, but by his comrades. It was not cruelty Crassus sought, but clarity. He wished his army to remember that unity could not survive fear, that courage, when broken, must be remade through shared consequence. The chosen men were brought forward. They did not beg, they understood. Their companions stood beside them, trembling, and did what was ordered. The sky above remained pale and indifferent. When it was done, the ground was turned, the bodies buried, and no speeches followed. Afterward, the camp was quiet, not from grief, but from focus. Every soldier knew what Crassus demanded, not victory at any cost, but obedience at every cost. The story spread through the legions like cold fire. Some hated him, others feared him, but all began to move as one. The next morning, drills resumed at dawn. Shields aligned, steps synchronized, silence enforced. For Crassus, this was not cruelty, but arithmetic. A broken army must be balanced, every number restored. In his mind, order was mercy because without it, Rome itself would splinter. Yet history remembers more than formulas. It remembers the still faces of men who learned, under Crassus, that survival could feel heavier than death. After the punishment came progress. The legions advanced methodically, reclaiming towns and routes once lost. Supply lines were tightened, deserters executed. The rebellion that had once spread like smoke began to meet resistance at every turn. Spartacus, who had defeated praetors and consuls, now faced a new kind of enemy, not impulsive, not arrogant, but patient. Crassus did not chase him, he contained him. He studied the paths of retreat, the rivers that fed the rebel camps, the roads that led to nothing. Every move was a line drawn tighter. The man of gold had become a man of iron. At night, his tents glowed faintly from lamplight. Not warm, but steady. He would study maps for hours, tracing with his finger where the rebellion would end. When asked if he feared Spartacus, he only said, "I fear disorder." In that, he was truthful. To him, Spartacus was not a man, but a symptom, a tear in the fabric of Rome that had to be sewn shut, even if the thread was made of blood. No one in the Senate loved him for it, but they began to sleep easier. The land narrowed as they moved south. The wide fields of Campania gave way to the stony ridges of Lucania, a country of wind, pine, and mist. The rebellion that had once burned like a storm now flickered, steadier but smaller, its fires dimmed by exhaustion. They had fought for 2 years. Each mile now felt longer than the last. Still, Spartacus pressed on. He carried within him a single remaining hope, the island of Sicily. There, he imagined, they could escape Rome's reach, regroup, and begin again. Sicily was fertile, full of fields once worked by slaves like them. Perhaps, he thought, those same people might rise to join him. To reach it, he sought passage from Cilician pirates who prowled the southern waters. They promised ships, gold for safety, swift crossing under the cover of night. But promises, like tides, are easily changed. The night the ships were to arrive, the horizon stayed empty. The sea was calm, the moon low, and only the wind answered. The pirates had taken their payment and vanished into open water, leaving Spartacus stranded upon the shore with his thousands, their faith in rescue dissolving with the dawn. From that moment, the rebellion began to close upon itself. They turned inland once more, weary but unbroken, retreating toward the narrow peninsula near Rhegium. Behind them, Rome moved with patience, Crassus drawing his legions closer, studying each ridge, each road, each whisper of smoke. He understood the terrain. Rhegium lay almost cut off from the rest of Italy, a finger of land reaching towards Sicily. Across the narrow isthmus, Crassus ordered his soldiers to build. Mile by mile, stone by stone, they raised walls and trenches stretching from coast to coast, a barrier not only of defense, but of design. The work took weeks. The men labored in silence, shovels and picks, striking earth in rhythm with the sea's dull roar. Behind them, torches burned along the growing line, marking Rome's intent across the dark. When it was finished, Spartacus's army found itself trapped. The wall sealed the peninsula like a lid upon a jar. Supplies dwindled, winter deepened, and hunger settled over the camp like frost. Still, no one spoke of surrender. The days shortened into one another, the smoke of the forges gone, the sound of hammers replaced by the quieter sound of endurance. Some hunted, some dug for roots, others mended their weapons, though there was little left to fight with. Then, one night, under rain and wind, a fragment of the army broke away. Perhaps desperation drove them the need to move, to act, to prove they still could. They found a weakness in the Roman lines and slipped through, thousands of them vanishing into the hills beyond. For a moment, it seemed they might survive. Crassus pursued them before dawn. His legions moved with the same precision he had forged through fear. They caught the fugitives near the edge of the plain and surrounded them. The fight that followed was short but fierce, not chaos, but clarity. When the killing stopped, 12,000 lay dead. Crassus walked among the bodies, inspecting, recording. Later, he would tell his officers something that history preserved. Of all the fallen, only 2 bore wounds on their backs. All the rest had faced the enemy. It was a small detail, barely a line in the chronicles, but it spoke louder than triumph. The war, once bright with fire, had settled into something colder, quieter. The great marches were over. What remained was the slow closing of a hand. Each side understood, in its own way, that the end was near. Spartacus still held a fragment of his army beyond the wall. They watched the horizon by night, the Roman campfires burning like stars they could never reach. Sometimes, in the wind, they could hear the low hum of Crassus's drills, the clatter of iron meeting iron. The sea lay beside them, calm and indifferent. They could not cross it, nor could they go back, so they waited, sharpening blades, binding wounds, resting in the brittle peace that comes before collapse. Some nights, Spartacus would walk alone to the edge of camp. He would look out toward the dark water, toward the island that never came. Perhaps he thought of the faces lost along the way, Crixus, Oenomaus, the nameless thousands. Perhaps he thought of Rome, waiting. There are no records of what he said then, only the silence, recorded by history itself, the kind of silence that is less absence than acceptance. Winter deepened, the wall held, and under that still grey sky, the man who had once shaken an empire stood waiting, not for rescue, not even for victory, but for the end to arrive with dignity. The river ran quietly that morning. Its surface caught the pale light of dawn silver, still, as if it too were waiting. Along its banks, mist drifted low, veiling the movement of men preparing for what they already knew could not be undone. This was the Salarius River, and here, at the end of the long wandering, the rebellion would meet its silence. Spartacus stood among his soldiers one last time. They had little left, worn weapons, tattered cloaks, hunger heavy in their limbs, yet none turned away. Around him, faces that had once burned with fury now held something quieter, not fear, but final understanding. They had come as slaves and would die as free men. The Romans approached in formation, the ground trembling faintly beneath their march. Crassus had drawn his legions tight, unwilling to risk another failure. He did not roar commands. He spoke them evenly, as if the outcome were already carved into the air. Behind him stretched the long discipline of Rome's shields like scales, glinting in the pale light, thousands moving as one body. Spartacus, seeing this, raised no speech, no cry for glory. He only mounted his horse, lifted his sword once toward the sky, and then dismounted again. He would fight on foot, beside his men. Appian wrote that before the first clash, Spartacus tried to reach Crassus himself, that he cut through lines of soldiers, killing centurions as he went, seeking the heart of the enemy, not from rage, but from resolve. Perhaps it is true. Perhaps he only moved forward, until the tide swallowed him whole. The battle unfolded without spectacle. There were no banners, no horns, no bright declarations, only motion, the dull thud of contact, the rhythm of endings. The field became a blur of dust and iron. Commands turned to silence, silence to breathing, breathing to nothing at all. Somewhere in that crush, Spartacus fell. No one saw the exact moment, no dramatized duel, no cry of pain. His body was never recovered. The man who had led thousands disappeared into the same earth that had carried him, unnamed, unburied, unbroken. By noon, it was done. Crassus's troops moved among the fallen, finishing what the chaos had left incomplete. The survivors were bound, numbered, and sent north along the road. 6,000 of them, perhaps more. That road, the Appian Way, would become their final march. From Capua to Rome, crosses were raised, evenly spaced, each bearing one of the defeated. For miles, the line of wood faded into the horizon, a grim geometry against the sky. The wind moved through it like breath through reeds. There was no laughter in this victory. Even the soldiers, hardened by campaign, spoke quietly as they passed the crucified. Rome had been made whole again, but the air around it carried a strange heaviness, the unease that comes when punishment outlives purpose. Far to the north, Pompey returned from Hispania, his legions still dusted with foreign sand. He intercepted a few thousand fugitives, those who had escaped the slaughter at the river, and cut them down. When the killing was finished, he sent a message to the Senate. Crassus defeated the slaves in open battle, he wrote, but I extirpated the war. It was a clean sentence, tidy as a seal on wax. Rome preferred it that way, endings simple, names arranged neatly. Yet history rarely agrees to such order. What remains of Spartacus is not his death, but his defiance, a whisper that moved through fields, chains, and centuries. He left no grave, only the memory of men who stood and did not run. The river still flows, the crosses long turned to dust, but somewhere along that road, beneath the soil, iron and bone sleep together, uncounted and at peace. The day faded into evening. The sky above the Salarius took on a color like cooled ash, neither light nor dark. Crassus's banners stirred once, then fell still. Rome had its victory, but the quiet belonged to someone else. No triumphal music, no final roar, only dusk and the slow return of the wind. The world moved on, as it always does. The crosses along the Appian Way rotted, one by one. The wind took the smell, the sun took the color, and in time, the road was only a road again. Dust, grass, and memory. Rome, restored to its order, resumed its march through history, counting victories, building monuments, carving names into marble. Yet the name they tried not to remember, the Thracians' name, did not fade. It drifted beneath the surface of things, soft as breath, patient as echo. When the years grew long and empires changed their flags, that name would rise again, quiet but unforgotten. Spartacus. Not as a general, nor as a rebel, nor even as a slave, but as a symbol, a pulse that still beats whenever people speak of dignity. History, written by victors, often carries the tone of marble, cold, smooth, self-assured. But under every monument there are bones that tell a different story. Stories not of conquest, but of endurance. Not of power, but of refusal. Spartacus became one of those quiet truths that survive beyond the reach of record. No empire claimed him. No tomb marked him. Yet his absence became its own presence, a kind of memory that does not need a nameplate to exist. The poets found him again, centuries later, in crowded theaters and quiet books. His story was retold, reshaped, reimagined, revived. Sometimes he was a hero, sometimes a shadow, sometimes a question whispered across time. What would you do if you were chained and found your hands suddenly free? Every age seems to ask it differently, but the heartbeat underneath remains the same. The historians wrote that his revolt failed, and perhaps, in Rome's measure of things, it did. The Republic survived, the slaves were silenced, the roads cleared. Yet if failure means being forgotten, then Spartacus did not fail. He endures wherever someone looks at injustice and does not turn away. He endures in the instinct to stand, even when standing changes nothing. He endures in the small, steady truth that dignity is not given by victory, it is claimed by living. We are told that he was Thracian, a man from the borderlands, neither wholly Greek nor Roman, belonging to no center of power. Perhaps that is why his story moves so freely. It has no empire to defend, no throne to justify. It belongs to everyone who has ever been small beneath the weight of something vast, and still chosen to lift their head. When night falls over the old roads of Italy, the fields whisper differently. The stones that once marked the dead are gone, but the soil remembers. The same wind that once moved through the crosses now passes through olive trees, carrying the faint echo of iron and song. Somewhere, a traveler walks the Appian Way, not knowing what bones lie beneath his steps. He sees only quiet fields and the slow fade of light over distance. Yet if he pauses, if he listens long enough, perhaps he will feel it, a steady presence beneath the earth, a pulse that never stopped entirely. That is what remains after noise, not the sound of battle, but the quiet that follows, the stillness that carries meaning forward, gently, like hands passing water. It is strange how peace often grows from the memory of struggle. The mind softens, time blurs the edges, and what once screamed becomes a whisper of understanding. Spartacus, who began as a man of blood and defiance, ends as something else, not an idol, not a warning, but a reminder that even fierce stories can rest. And so, as the story closes, we do not stand in triumph or in pity. We simply breathe. We remember that every life, whether crowned or crucified, becomes part of the same long rhythm, turning from fire to ash, from ash to soil, from soil to seed. And in that cycle, perhaps, there is the only kind of freedom that endures. If you listen closely, even now, you might hear it, not the cry of revolt, but the low murmur of humanity, a reminder that dignity, once awakened, never truly dies. So let the night settle, let the noise fade, and let what remains be still. And now, the story quiets. The names, the empires, the fires all fade into the hush of time. What remains is only breath, and the soft turning of the world beneath it. You don't need to remember the dates or the faces, just the feeling that even the loudest lives become gentle in the end. Let that thought rest with you tonight. If your eyes are heavy, let them close. The music will stay for a while, carrying you softly through what's left of the night. You are safe. The story is over. Now, only calm remains. Good night.